Hello and welcome to our pricing podcast series with the Professional Pricing Society. My name is Megan Ford with the Professional Pricing Society. Today's featured interview topic is machine learning and pricing with special guest and featured pricing expert, Mr. Alex Shartsis of PerfectPrice.io. Before we begin today's topic and discussion, I'd like to share a little bit about Alex Shartsis. Alex Shartsis is also a featured workshop presenter during our upcoming 28th annual Spring Pricing Workshops and Conference event in Miami, Florida. It'll be held this spring. We're excited to invite everyone to attend. For more information, please visit thepricingsociety.com. Alex will be leading a breakout workshop entitled Machine Learning and Pricing. About more he will share on this podcast. Alex, along with his partner, Young & Shin, founded PerfectPrice.io after being former Drawbridge colleagues. They spent years optimizing billions of ad and search results, and they've ultimately decided to create their own business solutions for companies. They provide a unique understanding of business challenges with technical know-how and, of course, pricing expertise to provide one-of-a-kind pricing optimization solutions for companies. For more information, please visit PerfectPrice.io, and also you can read more about their software solutions as well. Now we're going to get started with our interview with today's featured pricing expert, Mr. Alex Shartsis, to learn more about machine learning. Alex, we're so excited to have you on today's pricing podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Megan.
So let's jump right into it. What exactly is machine learning?
Well, it's a great question, and it's a question we get a lot. So machine learning is a new kind, or relatively new kind of way of building models and analyzing data. The big difference is that traditionally, when you wanted to understand something, you'd use more traditional tools of modeling, which meant a human would go in and try and figure out what features were important and build a model, maybe a linear regression or some other method to understand and explain the phenomenon you were seeing. So, whether that was what demand was for a particular kind of airline ticket, how your customers were similar or different in the segmentation strategy, a lot of other things. And what machine learning does is it essentially is a method of feeding the raw data to a machine and having that machine try and figure it out on its own. And so instead of explicitly saying, I think weekends are a peak time and our prices should be higher, or I think business customers show up in the mornings, you feed the raw data into the infrastructure, machine learning infrastructure, and it figures out that your prices should be higher on weekends or your prices should be higher in the mornings without knowing necessarily that was a particular segment. And it can also figure out things like what your segments are based on transactions. You might think people who buy a certain thing are a certain type of customer, and it can deduce that on its own. And so it's a new thing, relatively new thing for mainstream business, but it's been in use for the last 15 to 20 years by companies like Google, Microsoft, Facebook, and the ad industry, the digital ad industry, because they deal with volumes of data and need to make decisions more quickly than humans have time to analyze them using traditional methods.
Thanks, Alex. So again, another follow-up question, of course, would be, what exactly are the biggest challenges in the industry that currently pricing industry, businesses, and brands are facing?
Yeah, we get this a lot, and that's one of the reasons why we started this company. The biggest challenge that is facing pricing professionals today, and many other types of people, is big data. Now with the amount of data companies are generating, given that a lot of them are now selling digitally, they're selling in more markets at more price points, more products than ever before. It's just very hard to keep track of it all, and it becomes much harder to get insights out of this, what some people are calling data lakes or data oceans. And related to that, one of the big technologies that can help with that is machine learning and artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence is, a lot of artificial intelligence is really relying on machine learning as the underlying technology. And so those technologies are able to make sense of these data lakes without without a human having to wade through literally billions and billions of rows of data in some cases. The result of that is, the changes that are happening is that there's a lot more awareness of the needs of people like pricing professionals by investors. So, people are recognizing that there are these unmet needs in parts of industry that haven't really had software solutions before. And so, one of the things that we've built is a software as a service solution to solve some of these problems as a comprehensive solution for this. And investors are going to fund more companies like ours because they're seeing the needs of people like pricing professionals differently. And finally, I think when you talk about large enterprises, most large enterprises have traditionally bought servers themselves and hosted them behind their firewall and work with SAP, Oracle, the big vendors. And that's changing. I mean, Oracle now is very cloud focused. You have Salesforce, which has become a major player even in the Fortune 100. And so, as these companies become more comfortable with SaaS solutions, that's opening up their employees, the professionals that run those companies, to a lot more solutions and a lot more fully fledged solutions than they've had in the past.
Thank you, Alex. So a question that may be on the minds of many is we're hearing a lot about artificial intelligence more recently than not, particularly within the pricing industry, even as a means to, or as a burgeoning technology. So do you think that it would replace revenue managers or ultimately have a place to, or a lane to replace pricing professionals?
No. I mean, that's an easy one, and I say that having thought myself at first that it would, but absolutely not, and for a few structural reasons. First, just where it is in the technology evolution. When you're serving advertisements, or when you're dealing with search results, you can be much more wrong than you can with something like pricing and a lot of the operations issues that pricing professionals deal with. So if your search results on page 4 or 2, right, people will still find it. They'll still click on it. You'll eventually learn from that and fix it. But with pricing, you still need people to be involved, because if you get a forecast really wrong and that changes the utilization of your factory or the utilization of your fleet or your airline, like it doesn't, the consequences are much larger. So the technology itself is incredibly capable and can do a lot, but it can't do everything. Second, I think that one of the big things about AI is that it has the ability to enhance people and but not only their productivity, but what they can do. And it does that by calculating a lot of things that it would have taken them too long to calculate, and so you would never do. And so one of the examples we like to use is a car rental company. We work with a lot of car rental companies. Even a company with 20 locations and 10 different vehicles at each location isn't actually a very large car rental company, but you're already dealing with 365 times 10 vehicles times 10 locations, probably times 4 different prices per day, times 300. You have to price everything every day, so 365 days a year. It becomes really, really complicated, and AI machine learning can much more efficiently calculate all the supply and demand and elasticity curves. That said, even companies like Uber, which uses AI machine learning heavily, still need to carefully supervise it, right? I mean, if you have a snowstorm and it shuts down the roads, you've got to do something about that data, because that data is not going to inform the next year. That day the next year is not going to be a day with no rides. So there's this need for kind of bumpers, if you will, or supervision for any AI system, and as AI becomes widespread, people are going to go back and enhance it by doing better. And so if you look at what's happened with chess and with Go, the sort of games that are popular for AI systems to try and beat humans at, the best human and the best machine playing together will always beat a human or a machine. And so there's this notion that it's not just a human playing on its own. It's not just a machine playing on its own, but it's the creativity of the human and the math of the machine that really create the winning team. And we'll see that, I think, in pricing and in a lot of other industries as well.
Great answer. And that explains a whole lot. So how will business owners or brands in general know that they're getting the most from their data? How are they able to tell they're getting the most ROI?
That's an interesting question. I think people today look at Amazon and think, oh, well, they get everything they can out of their data. You know, they're so smart about data. But that hasn't actually always been the case. Back in the early 2000s, 2003, 2004, Amazon wasn't getting everything they could out of their data. And they undertook an initiative to warehouse their data and start to extract value from it, because they realized that they were leaving a lot of knowledge essentially and money on the table. I think today very few companies are getting much out of their data. A lot of the companies we speak with talk about how they focus their models and their pricing on purchases, actual purchase orders and transactions. And in e-commerce, if you have a 1% conversion rate, you're doing pretty well. That means that if you're only looking at that 1% that bought, you're throwing out 99% of your data. So, in general, we find that companies are not using their data, and that's okay, right? I mean, everybody needs to have that realization that there's value in it. If Amazon screwed that up at the beginning and righted itself, everybody can. We have a few questions that we suggest people ask. One of the first ones is, can all of your employees access your data, right? Are they able to ask a question and go get an answer on their own? And the second one is, are your employees able to answer the questions they need to answer every day? I think there's some companies, and this is the third thing, there's some companies that are okay with questions coming up in meetings and saying, we don't know. But if it's an important question, you should be able to, if it can be answered, you should have an answer to it, right? And so not that you should go out and do 3 months of work to get that answer, but can you have an infrastructure, a data strategy in place that makes those answers quick and easy for people who are asking them to answer themselves? I think, finally, some of these questions are maybe a waste of time, but if the answer to one of them might have a huge payoff, is that an easy question to answer, or is the barrier to answering that question just too high for anybody to bother?
Thanks, Alex. Our next question comes specifically about the pricing industry yet again. So we wanted to know what your thoughts about the pricing industry's evolution. So what do you think about pricing careers changing within the industry? So specifically, your views of how pricing careers are going to evolve, especially with the advent of AI intelligence, we just mentioned, and other technologies.
That's a really interesting question. We're very sensitive to the concerns people have about, AI and machine learning replacing them, which, again, isn't going to happen. But that isn't to say that it isn't going to change the industry. One of the things that's going to happen, I think, is that pricing is going to become a very hot and popular industry. That's because these technologies are available, and that with those technologies will bring change. And we're just at the beginning of that cycle. That may also be just because, of the overall cycle of the economy, getting much hotter and growing much faster. There's just a lot more opportunity for growth, and pricing can be a big driver there. I think that, people, whether they're investors or managers, executives, are realizing how important making data-driven decisions are. And, before it was okay to say, hey, that's my gut. Like, I've been doing this 25 years and I think we should do X. But today, that Amazon data-focused culture and Google and really all the leading companies in public and private today are really focused on data. And so, it's not good enough to say, I just feel I've been doing this for a while, I feel like that's right. You have to have data to back that up, and that's true in pricing as much as it is anywhere else. So, career-wise, I think what you'll see is, as especially in the B2B sales world, as sales funnels become more scientific, become more optimized, you're using InsideSales.com, you're using these other tools, to really, aggressively manage and optimize that, that lead to cash flow, gut feel just doesn't work anymore, right? You can't, if you have 100 salespeople, you can't have 5 of them outperforming because they're pricing on gut and that's working better than the other 95. Like you need all 100 to perform at the same level. So, that's a big change that I think will really create demand for pricing professionals and also help pricing professionals do their jobs better because people will be more focused on the data, which I realize has always been a challenge, getting senior salespeople to be okay with that. And I think it's pretty clear that in B2C companies, you can see that's already happened. So, at the last Pricing Society conference, there's a great talk, by the head of pricing at Nike about how Nike realized that culturally being blind on price was really hurting, wasn't fitting with their core values and was letting down their customers. And I think you'll see that really extend into other industries beyond B2C, and that'll create opportunities for pricing professionals. It'll also make people more open to their ideas and using some science and some math to make decisions.
Thank you, Alex. So let's stay in the same vein or a similar vein. We know that pricing is very important to many companies and is considered by most, especially within finance and marketing, as a core competency. Should brand owners build machine learning or artificial intelligence and their capabilities in-house? Is that even an option, or should they outsource? This is really a question for those within the industry. So again, should brand owners or business owners utilize machine learning or artificial intelligence capability in-house, or should they outsource or get a vendor to provide that?
That's an interesting question. And as a vendor, I'll try and be as impartial as I can. That question assumes something pretty big, and that assumes that they could build it in-house. And I don't say that because we're a vendor. I say that because there are only a couple hundred people in the world who are actually able to build systems like this that work really well. And so, you see, if you search LinkedIn for the title data scientist, you'll see a very large number of people. But, if you go look at the companies that hire the people that are really great at machine learning and AI, there's a handful of them. And those people like to work with their peers at Netflix, at Amazon, at Google, at Facebook. And so, even GE and Walmart really struggle to hire top talent. And it's impossible to overstate how important it is to have really, truly top talent building these systems, because the second rate, the people who don't fully understand the technology are not going to deliver solutions, period. Never mind solutions that, compile and run, but you won't get you won't optimize the way a well-built solution could. And so if GE and other Walmart and other huge names struggle to hire the right people, then how can anybody outside of the big tech industry companies? So second, I think, is a time to value question. So if you're thinking about doing this, and you could work with a vendor and have a solution live or being piloted in anywhere from 1 month to 6 months, depending on your industry and the challenge you're facing, and whether there's a truly off-the-shelf solution or not. You could be live in 3 to 6 months, and in an industry with serious legacy software, maybe 9 months or 12 months. If you try and build it yourself, chances are in 6 months you won't have found the right people, right? So assuming you could even hire them, it's going to take you a few months to assemble the full team of, around 10 people to manage the Hadoop, the data center, the cluster, to manage build the models, manage the infrastructure, build the, and so you're 6 months in, you've spent $250,000 to $500,000 on recruiters to hire those people, and you don't have anything to show for it yet. And then they're building from scratch. And so, if you pick the right people, it's still going to take them, 4 to 6 months, possibly longer, to have the infrastructure set up before they're even delivering anything. And so, some of it's I recognize that some companies really want to invent things themselves. But I think that it's, this space in particular is unusually challenging in that respect. And that doesn't even count, what data does that vendor bring to the table? What know-how about the industry does that vendor bring to the table? What benchmarking or third-party data or other, economies of scale and network effects that vendor might have. That's just, as if you built something yourself. Simple build versus buy is a pretty tough call. And I also say, like, I think if you can do that, by all means, if you think you can, try, right? I mean, it's not, we've talked to a lot of companies, and this even frankly happens at Amazon Web Services, AWS, they'll have companies that say, oh, we want to do this ourselves, and they'll go do it, and then they'll come back. So, I think if you're not sure, if you don't feel like you want to partner with somebody, like, go try yourself and have that experience. And if you're successful, great. We're always happy to advise, and our blog has a lot of really useful knowledge that you can apply in that effort. But we think once people try it, the vast majority won't be able to get the results they want.
Thank you. So again, another follow-up within that vein. Well, at what point should larger enterprises be concerned with building their own solutions?
Yeah, I think again, I encourage people to really consider it seriously, before you even go out to vendors, because I think vendors, it may seem like the easy course, and it may be tough to get momentum internally. An example that I like to go back to is Airbnb. So Airbnb was our first pitch. We hadn't even raised money yet. We were just a couple guys with this idea that you could apply machine learning to pricing, that peer-to-peer marketplaces was an interesting place to do that. We went in and talked to senior management at Airbnb. They liked it so much they hired 10 people and built it themselves. And I respect that. I think if I were at Airbnb, I may have made the same decision. And the key difference there is that, they have a brand that's huge in the tech world. They're in San Francisco, and they had access to that right talent. And they had, at the time, something like $500 million in the bank to spend on that talent. And so, they've published stuff on it. They're sort of a great contributor in the space. They've open sourced a bunch of the stuff that they did. But, as much as I wish that they had, signed and used our software instead of building their own, I think it was the right move for them. And so, there are some companies that, that can check all those boxes, that have the capital, that can attract the talent, that can retain the talent, where I think building internally can make sense. That said, if they'd worked with us, I'm sure they would have had a great solution as well. So, and by the way, if you want to follow up on that, if you Google Aerosolve, AEROSOLVE, or look at the Airbnb's blog for pricing, they published a bunch of really interesting results and open sourced how they did it. So.
Thank you, Alex. And we've got two more questions. We want to know your thoughts about pricing analysts. What role do you think the pricing analysts will morph into in the near future?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, especially in light of sort of your earlier question about the future of careers for pricing professionals. So pricing analysts are going to continue to be vital. I think the big change is that a lot of the really sort of rote, boring stuff will be more automated, and so they'll spend their time more on a couple things, primarily on looking backwards, right? Were things working the way they were supposed to? Did we anticipate this or that? Is it getting it right or not? And making adjustments going forward, and then making adjustments for unusual events going forward. Because even at the Ubers of the world, your snowstorm or Super Bowl, like, there are unusual events that have to be addressed, and the only way to do that is with people. So pricing analysts, I think, are going to have a more fun time because they're going to be working on the more interesting stuff, while the more rote, boring, data collection, cutting and pasting, that sort of thing is going to go away. And then And then I think there's also going to be a big, a lot of need for change management and training, right? So if you have that sales team, they're going to have these tools in front of them much more frequently. It might hopefully become part of their workflow. They need to be trained on that. They need to be managed on that. They need support of those tools because they're not going to understand at least not at first, understand the science beneath them. And in rolling out any pricing strategy, as everybody listening to this probably knows, the human side of it's by far the most important. You have to really deliver for those customers and internal customers and get buy-in from your internal team, whether that's the marketing team in a B2C world, whether that's the sales team in a B2B world, and pricing analysts are going to have a big role in that, in being sort of the face of that analysis. Well, in the background, they're going to be managing those exceptions and doing a lot more strategic thinking than they have in the past. So I hope that answers your question.
It did. Thank you, Alex. So we've got one more question, and thank you so very much for participating in this awesome chat. Our final question for today would be your thoughts about the pricing landscape 5 years from now. What are your thoughts regarding the composition of pricing teams in the near future?
Well, I think a couple of things are going to happen, and it really depends on the industry and the application. So I think for B2C companies, companies selling direct to consumers, airline, rental car, even e-commerce, you'll see a real shift towards what I call real data science, and that's PhD type people building scalable systems, that are really calculating the probabilities and demand curves and managing consumer behavior proactively. So not just trying to capitalize on what consumers are doing, but to actually use data science to influence what consumers do. And that's what Amazon does today. That's what Netflix does. I think a lot more large companies will do that. And I think companies where that's spread out to individual business units or spread out around the world, it will consolidate it in one group, because you don't need a lot of PhDs doing that differently in each division. You need one really great team centrally. And so, I think that'll be the trend in the B2C world. I think for B2B companies, I think you're going to see more automation and more focus on getting data into the tools that salespeople and marketers are using. And so that means that for the sort of pricing professionals, they're maybe going to be more embedded with sales. They're going to have a lot more responsibility in the future. And the data that their work product, their output, isn't going to be this annoying bureaucratic step that you have to go through to close your deal. It's going to be part of your day-to-day, in your Salesforce dashboard, in your configure price quote tool. It's just going to be in front of you all the time. And so they'll be much more high profile, drive a lot more results as a result of that. And hopefully I think have a bigger impact overall. So things like one distributor we talked to, really smart guy, built a more than $100 million a year business right out of college. And he's like, I have this rule where if people want to do sell for less than a 10% margin, they have to get my permission. And guess what? Everybody sells for 10% margin because they don't have to come get my permission. But sometimes maybe it should be 12 or 15, right? I mean, who said 10% was right? And I think as the data science gets better and infiltrates these companies and pricing becomes more important to everybody as a science, pricing analysts and the pricing team is going to have a bigger impact throughout, and you'll migrate completely away from those kind of gut-based, heuristic type decisions like 10% or get the CEO's permission, and everything will be based on science, and that'll all be coming from the pricing team.
Thank you so much, Alex. You gave us awesome insight, especially about machine learning and the pricing industry. So as we close with this awesome podcast, I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell listeners where they can find you and learn more about your company.
Sure, thanks, Megan. So we're online at PerfectPrice.io. We have a blog there that we publish sort of deeper thoughts on the pricing industry and a daily email that gives you sort of 1 3-minute read a day on pricing science, which a lot of people find useful. And then, of course, we'll be at the Pricing Society conference coming up, and we're really excited to be covering this topic there as well. You can also email me if you want directly, just at alex@perfectprice.io, or contact me through the website.
Thanks, Alex. Again, Alex will be a featured presenter during the Spring Pricing Workshops and Conference in Miami, Florida. For more information and to register specifically for Alex's workshop, please visit us at pricingsociety.com. Thank you again, Alex, for your awesome expertise and for talking with us today in our pricing podcast series. We look forward to seeing you in Miami. Everyone else that's listening, we are excited to have you again. Please subscribe to the podcast series. If you have any questions about pricing or membership, subscribing to our podcasts or webinars, and more marketing information, please visit pricingsociety.com, where we have all of our information on our fabulous new website for you to view. And stay tuned for another pricing podcast in our upcoming series. Thanks for listening, and happy pricing.